In today's world, the majority of our files are digital. But as a teacher, there are some things that we just need to have a paper version of, and we need to be able to easily find them. That's what I'm sharing in today's video. If you're new here, I'm Rachel Vincent, and I love sharing ways to help teachers simplify their class and their teaching. So the papers I'm talking about are not like the weekly copies that your students work on. That's not the organization of papers that I'm talking about in this video. I actually do have a video on that, and I will link it in the cards. The first kind of physical copy that we typically tend to have are personal information on our students. Now I know a lot of that is computerized now, but I still keep a physical copy. Our families have to fill out a form at the beginning of the year, typically on our Meet the Teacher night, and we turn those into the office. I will make a copy of those so I have a physical copy for myself. Sometimes the computer system's down and we can't access phone numbers, and so I like to have a physical copy. Now, you can keep those in a file if that's the way you work. I prefer to keep them in my teacher notebook. This is also where I will keep copies of students' IEPs or medical information that often get handed out at the beginning of the year by our school nurse and resource teachers, and so I keep those in there as well and save them for the year. This is also where I keep student data, test scores, different things like that. I have a whole video explaining everything that I keep in my teacher's notebook, and I will link that also in the cards. With those set aside, there are certain types of files that I keep physical copies of. One of them are what I call my yearly copies. I keep them for the school year, for the duration that I have the students that I have, and then I get rid of them and I'll get a new set the following year. Those are things like permission slips for field trips or media release forms, my Thursday folder work report that I send home every Thursday. I do one for each quarter of the year, and so when the first quarter is over, I take those out, I save them, I keep things like that, things that I need for maybe documentation purposes, because I want to make sure if a parent was to come and say, I had no idea my child wasn't doing well, I have that documentation saved for the year saying, well, here are your signatures, or here's where you saw your students' grades, different things like that. I want to make sure that those I need to keep for the year. And so then at the end of the year, I can shred personal information, all that stuff, and then start over with my new students. What I do is I have the file folder created in my drawer so that I have a place for it to go, so that when I get these papers at the beginning of the year or throughout the year, I know exactly where they go. I keep them there, save them until the end of the year, and then I can get rid of them and they're empty to start all over. But in order to not become overwhelmed by all of the papers, you need to plan for a place for those things to go, because you're going to have them. You're going to have permission slips that you have to keep until the field trip or sometimes afterwards. You're going to have documentation that you need to keep, and you need a place for that to go, or otherwise it's just going to get piled on top of piles. Now the next kind of files really kind of depend on what you teach, what grade you teach, and I guess maybe even your style of teaching, because if you do a lot seasonally or monthly, you may want to have monthly files. You may have containers, like storage containers that you want to keep yours in. It just really kind of depends on what you keep. Now I do have seasonal tubs that I keep, like books and decorations and activities that I've prepped. Those are separate from like paper copies. If it is a craft or a project that is paper that I have created an example of, I like to keep those, whether it's even seasonally or just like a project, I like to keep those in what I call my quarterly files. I don't typically have enough to justify each month, so I do it based on quarters. There are times when I have a digital file where the whole page, like I need one whole page and then like just a little bit of the next page, but there was room on that first page to put it, and I don't want to use like 2 copies for each student when something I know I can make it as one. So I'll print them out and cut it apart and tape it. And so I will keep that file as well, because I've already done the work for it, so that when I go to do it again, I already have it. I can just run it through the copy machine. There are also things that I'll keep if a coworker hands me a physical copy of something and I don't have it digitally. I will keep that. If I have time, I will scan it and keep it digitally. but it's just so often you just get papers and you just like need a place for it to go. Those also go in my quarterly files. I do have certain times of the year where I have a lot of things that I keep. One of them that goes beyond my quarterly files, one of them would be like my back to school file. I have a whole folder full of back to school things. Even though I have it digitally, I like to keep it physically because often what I will like to do is at the end of the school year, I want to make copies for the beginning of the school year. One, I already have a parent volunteer who does the copies already set up at the end of the year, where typically at the beginning of the year I don't have it quite yet. So I want to utilize that parent. Plus typically towards the end of the year, it's test review, lots of things. We're not making as many copies, so it gives them something still to do. So having that all in a file is just easy to pull that out and go ahead and get it sent to the copies. So I do keep that. I have it digitally, but I also keep that physically. Plus it's also a place for me to keep the copies of the papers that I put up on the wall that says like amazing work coming soon. That all goes in that folder. So just so I'm able to find it all easily at the end and beginning of the year. The other thing that I like to make sure I have space for physically are copies for sub. I use a substitute binder where I have all of my procedures and class lists and schedules and seating charts and all that, and I keep that all in my binder. I have a video on that as well that I will link if you want more details. I have a file for each subject where if there's something that we didn't get to, or maybe I for some reason just already have a class set of copies that I'm not using, I will go ahead and file that in my sub section for my subjects. That way, when it is time to plan for a sub, I can see what I already have. A lot of times I will save extra graphic organizers in there and different things that I can use with anything. It's great for that. It's also great, like if there's an emergency and I'm not able to send plans, I can tell my coworker. In my files, I have a whole section of just extra copies for a sub, pull those, give them to the students. And it makes it so much easier for myself and my coworker if an emergency arises. So like I said, I don't have a whole lot of physical files, but I do enough to fill one drawer of my little 2-drawer filing cabinet. I also like to put my color cardstock and copy paper organized in the bottom of that as well. Makes it easy to pull out the color and papers I need when I'm going to run copies or do craft projects. If you're curious to see how I organize all of my digital files, check out the video that's on your screen now.